Hi everybody and welcome. My name is Mark Rautenbach and I am taking Lex and Stephen on a tour of my show, and I'm starting here at the title wall, so I can show you the title, which is World Worlding. So the title is really about a world being itself, and this world is about my world, my inner world, which I'm going to show you and lead you through. So we're trying something out here. We've got 3 people on their phones videoing while I'm talking, while I'm showing. And this work, so okay, World Worlding comes with a question. The subtitle is a question, which is, can I change the world by changing myself? And if that is the case, if I would like to create a happy, healthy world outside of me, what would my inner world need to look like? And there are 14 pieces in the show. I'm just giving you a quick overview and then I'll go through each one. Each work speaks to or embodies a practice that I have found I've needed to get into in order to create that happy, healthy, balanced world. And we're going to start down here. We're going to start with this group of sculpture. And the title of these pieces are The Worlding Noonoos. And I start here because it's a type of art making or art that I've made, which I started 10 years ago. So also, just to backtrack a bit, sorry, there's some pieces in this body that are from 16 years ago, from about 10 years ago, and I've made the main body in the last 3 years with quite a lot of intense work in the last 6 months during COVID, the lockdown. So the Noonoos was a type of sculpture making process that I started 10 years ago, where I did an experiment for 1 year, and that experiment was I was making a declaration to the world, to the universe, that I was willing to take responsibility for all my stuff, for all of my being, and all the stuff that comes through my being. Basically, willing to become responsible for all my shit, to just put it plainly. And the experiment was, I would compost everything that I could, I would recycle everything that I could, and then I would always find that there was some material which couldn't be composted and couldn't be recycled. And I saw that as the kind of almost like a basic play that came through my being, which I needed to somehow deal with. And so I started binding this material. That material also became, I saw it as problematic. It's stuff that I would like to be rid of, but have to deal with, and it started coming to represent parts of my psyche that I would like to be rid of, and no matter how hard I try to get rid of, I still have it. So it's like my character defect. So things like possessiveness or competitiveness or greediness or putting people down. You know, as much work as I do on myself, I still find those things arise. So now I've got to plug into certain practices in order to try and transform that. So I started binding that material with thread, and then they started relating to each other as clusters, as assemblages. And then the original pieces were quite small, and they got to about 30 centimeters high. And they became known as the Noonoos. And Noonoos in South Africa is an affectionate term for some kind of creature, being, thing. So that series of sculptures, say, it lasted for about 3 years. And then this way of binding material, problematic material, just became a way of working. It became a way of me drawing, pulling things together, cocooning, soothing myself. And what I would also do is collect the material from projects, like the fallout, the detritus from making a certain artwork, and then use that almost as the mother dough for another work. So in these Noonoos, these particular worlding Noonoos, all the material here has been the packing all the fallout, all the detritus from the making of the work of the show. And for example, this one in the front here, this blue and green one, this one only arrived after the show was set up, and that has all the tissue that was covering the artworks to get them here, which then became that. So from this group of sculptures, I then go to the next work, which is this piece on the wall here. Sure, yes.
So just in terms of these pieces, these sculptures, does each one represent a particular issue or a particular element that you feel you haven't eliminated from in terms of this process of integrating your stuff, integrating your shit, as you put it?
Yeah.
Are these things that have resisted that integration and have stood outside of that process to some degree?
Yes, and there's a kind of persistence with them. They keep on reappearing. And say, for example, competitiveness. It's like I find, my competitiveness can propel me forward in some ways, and then in some places it is problematic. In some social areas it's really problematic, and I can work on that. I can become more aware of it, and to some extent maybe integrate that. But then I find the competitiveness pops up in another place, at another stage, which I wasn't aware of. So it's an ongoing process of, I guess, the shadow revealing itself, and because that is what the shadow is. It's those parts of myself that I don't like about myself, and I shove it into, well, that's how I see the shadow, and it'll surface. The more I push down on something, more it's going to come up.
And does each sculpture represent a specific element? So is each one a symbolization of a specific element of that, or is that too reductive the way I'm saying it?
No, it would be more, no, it's not as specific as that. No. I mean,
the idea of it.
Yes, and they might come together in some assemblage which starts looking like a certain kind of character or something, and I might gain meaning or insight that way, but no, they don't necessarily have. And then also I think I need to add at this stage, my approach to art making is I don't know what I'm doing. I'm throwing myself into the unknown, and I think the way I'd like to describe it is it's like a scrying method. Like you would go to the crystal ball, or you would throw the bones, or you'd do the teacup with the tea leaves. I make this stuff, and then it starts talking back to me, and then meaning reveals itself. I don't approach it with the meaning.
Okay, so there's kind of a dialogue going on between the piece all the time.
Yes, and that dialogue can also come about through conversations like this. So you might have insights. You might see something in that and share that with me, and it's like, aha, okay, is that actually what wanted to be revealed? Is that what's wanting to get my attention? And so even though an artwork might arrive at this point, it might continue. So what also happens is that I might rework it and becomes material for something else.
Is that generally true of all of your work? Is it all work in progress in a certain sense, or?
Largely.
Yeah.
There's some techniques which kind of don't lend themselves to that are more resolved in that sense.
But as a principle, there's always
Yes, yeah. And that becomes a metaphor for my being, really. There's never really a case of I've arrived. And hence the title worlding. It's a kind of verb. It's still worlded, like a past tense kind of thing. So this piece on the wall, this one is called Lunasphere, and also titles are quite important. The titles can behave like poems, and the titles can change. Often titles come via other people or bits of writing that I come across. So these pieces, I made them as the basis for those early Noonoos sculptures. So as you can see, the Noonoos sculptures were quite small. I'll just give you a reference to you can see how the scale of these. And after I had done that series of sculptures, I found that I had 22 of these left. So I saved those and then wanted to do a larger piece with them. Now, how I got here was that these surfaces are pieces of linoleum, which I found on the beach, a particular beach in Cape Town, Mully Point Beach. And I started finding these 10 years ago. These would be washed up on the beach, and it's pretty peculiar, these pieces of flooring, plastic flooring. And I continue to find them. But what I found so delightful about them is that these pieces of plastic have been shaped by the sea. So it's, I consider it like an organic shaping. And so for the bases of the sculptures, I then laminated them on corrugated cardboard on many layers, and then I beveled them. It's like a beveled edge, and then they became the bases. So there was also like a pun on flooring as base. It's the floor for the Noonoos to stand on. But what became significant for me in this work is that there were 22 left, and 22 is quite a significant number. In the tarot, it represents the last of the major arcana, which is the world. So immediately, like, okay, there's something afoot here, because that's how art is. It talks to me, and then astrologically, that corresponds with the planet Saturn, which is the father of time. It's about maturity, restriction. It's the father. It's external world, it's structure. And because there's the theme of the moon regulates the oceans, regulates the tides, and it was those tides, it was that ocean, that water, which shaped these pieces of plastic. The story that got revealed to me was there's something about becoming responsible for, the Saturn principle, for my feelings, becoming responsible for what I do with my feelings, how I behave, basically growing up internally. So this piece comes to represent that process of being vigilant, and that maturity is an ongoing process. You don't just suddenly turn a certain age and become mature. It's an ongoing work.
Growing up is not something that comes to an end. It's something
it's ongoing.
Always ongoing.
Yes. And it's a process of maturing. And then I'll just show you some more details that each piece, because there's 22, I started categorizing. I had my own form of categorizing. I categorized them with letters. So there's A to V for the 22. The paper that I've used here is from my recycle bin of various documents that come through my life and fill up a box. I've put and it's difficult to video this, but I've put like an iridescent blue sheen, so it's got that feeling of a moon, the light of the moon. And it's a circle to suggest full moon. And because the moon is constantly changing, like our moods and feelings inside are constantly changing and fluctuating. And there's Lex, you can see her in the picture, giving a good sense of scale. And okay, from there, I'm moving on to the next series. So are there any other insights? Is there anything that you want to say more about that? We can always come back as well. Isn't it fascinating?
On the beach?
Yes.
And you continue to...
I found one 4 months ago. I mean, I haven't really been looking for them, but, and that's another way I make art. It's objects. I find, because I walk, I don't have a car, so I'm walking around a lot of the time, so I get to see things lying on the ground, things that we kind of go unnoticed. And for me, that's almost something shamanic. I think that's, the artist as shaman. It's the shaman that's also looking at things which most people don't see or can't see. And often those are the discarded things that are lying, lurking in the corners, or, the bits in the lint of the pocket or whatever. And what is this? This is really peculiar. I mean, what happened? How did that plastic get there? Was it a container that got washed over? I mean, there's such a variety. It suggests that it was, I don't know, samples, or is it just literally bits of flooring, you know, from houses? I mean, it speaks of District 6. It's, you know, the history of Cape Town. There's so much history in there, and that's what fascinates me about found objects. It's got a story contained within it which might reveal itself. It can also be Sphinx-like and say, I'm not going to give up my secrets. We love the Sphinx. Yeah, interesting. Anyway, so those, the pieces of cardboard which I'd laminated and cut those shapes out of, I'd also collected. I really loved these shapes. They were just very powerful, potent shapes. And I discovered that there were 22 of those. Surprise, surprise. Totally unplanned. And they looked like continents for me. So again, it started reinforcing this idea of a world, this world that wanted me to take notice of it. And I reinforced that idea by sticking pieces of atlas on top of them and inside of them. And then the holes started looking like wounds, like gouging out into this earth. And I mean, clearly there is, in my work, there's a strong ecological, environmental issue, recycling, composting. I'm deeply concerned with the way we treat the planet, or don't even acknowledge the planet. It's just seen as some kind of, I don't know, shop that we can just like use up. So this is also part of my making, that as an artist, I believe that I can affect change, that I'm going into shamanic, alchemical practices which can affect change. So I've gone in here and I've gone and knitted. This is all knitted. I don't know if this is coming out in the video. It's circular knitting, so I'm starting with 4 stitches in the center, and I'm knitting with sewing thread, and then I'm grading the color. Each row is a different color to give you the sense of dyed, graded color. So using color as a method of healing, using texture, sequencing of color as a method of healing. And then in many references, it starts looking like cells, they start looking like agates. And then what I've done with this is I've put them on a shelf, so they almost become like specimen, like in some kind of archaeological dig or some kind of. Because my concern is that we're not going to really be left with an earth. We're just going to be left with the archive of the earth. And this piece is called Somewhere, very long landscape. And it's actually one piece, it's been interrupted here by the door. We didn't have a long enough wall in the gallery. I guess you're not supposed to say those kinds of things, but. And it's over 5, and it's 5 meters 22 centimeters long. And so the Somewhere, I've spelt, it's SOMEW, and then the HERE is actually spelled HEAR. So and I've crossed out the Some W so that there's an emphasis on listen, and it's a playing on here as in place and here as in listen. Like we need to listen to our environment. Do you need to?
Something struck me that I thought was interesting is the relationship between these 2 pieces. This piece that you've just shown us.
Yes.
And then the actual cutouts. Well, I mean, you know, I'm not quite sure what you refer. Are those the Noonoos? Is that
Those are the bases for the Noonoos.
Are the bases, and then where you've cut them out of.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, so this is kind of a negative space in a certain sense of that. And I'm wondering if something occurred to you, something came up around the relationship of these two pieces. Like, are they in some sort of a dialogue, or is there something between the space that the negative space and the bases that kind of occurred to you? Is there any thoughts about that? From a psychoanalytic perspective, there's an interesting relationship between conscious and unconscious, explicit and implicit. Positive and negative, you know what I mean? So
I think that's a very interesting insight and point. I started seeing this very much as an inner landscape. So these, I guess, are kind of mountains, peaks. Whereas with these ones, these are sort of something gouged out, something was removed. But these ones have a surround, so there's like a shape on the, so that also could be a peak, it could also be a mountain. But you've made me aware of this now. I mean, I saw these kind of as wounds that needed to be healed. That's why I've come in with the knitting.
And following that kind of metaphorical thinking, what would that be then?
These would be more structural. So it's putting in, because this for me is very much about growing up, maturing emotionally, and being emotionally mature. And I guess a mountain is more a kind of father principle in that sense, in a Jungian sense.
So maybe something to do with masculine.
I would
structure and room.
Yes, I would definitely go with that.
Right, because from a psychoanalytic perspective, that's to do with the explicit personality and the persona and the ego, etc. And this is kind of the unconscious.
Yes.
What's left behind in the unconscious all.
Yes.
What it takes, you know.
Yes.
So it's quite. It just sort of resonates nicely from a psychoanalytic perspective.
Yes, I love that. Yes. And of course, earth as a kind of feminine principle. I also want to add right here that, feminine doesn't equal woman, and masculine doesn't equal man. We're not on that page. But absolutely, yes, I go along with that.
It's interesting the word as a structure.
Yeah. And how traditionally the feminine is where the wound would come up. Within the whole patriarchal structures, I guess.
That is born by the feminine.
Yes.
The feminine bears the wound.
Yes.
In order for the structure to rise.
Yes. And how, in order to become whole, because that's what I see the individuation process as being, I've got to balance those within myself. The masculine and the feminine, the structured and the wounded.
You're saying to bring those together?
Yes. So before I got to this final composition with Somewhere, very long landscape, I had taken these, and I'm going to just demonstrate this. I'd taken these individual pieces and I had placed them on a large circle. So I was using the circle as a symbol of wholeness, as the world, as a kind of map. So on this circle, for example, so the piece I'm showing you, the title of this piece is Putting Myself Back Together, and it's just under 3 meters square piece of paper, which is suspended in space, and it has a front and a back. And what we're looking at right now is the back. And I'm just going to demonstrate, so this is one of those pieces, so I'm showing you the back of it. It would have been positioned over here, and then you can see there's an indication of where that would be. And then around it is a larger area. So each one of these has a section. This would have been one of those continents on the shelf, and then it's got a surround, this other piece there. So it's putting it in context, but you can see how this world has been divided up. It's been analyzed. It's been cut up in all these sections, and now these sections have been put back in place. And really what this was marking, and then as a result, a spiral has been able to be drawn. So the spiral, this really marked a process in my life where I had gone through many decades of deconstruction, which is the whole kind of postmodern thing. And I'd reached a point in my life, which is middle age, where I had to pull myself back together. I had to put myself back together, gain some sense of wholeness in order to proceed further in my life. And art making for me is a way of understanding that process and demonstrate that process and play with that process. So the analyzing and the cutting up, I would say, is what would destroy that flow of life, that spiral. And then by the putting back together, becoming whole, allows that flow of life to happen again. And also, just in terms of design terminology or maybe artistic techniques and things, the circle for me is something feminine. It's static, it's complete, it's circular, it's round, doesn't move. And then the masculine is a vector, which is one point moving in space. And when those two collide, when they meet each other, a spiral is formed. And depending on the which is stronger, if the vector is stronger or the circle is stronger, it's going to be the spiral will be going inwards or it will be going outwards. So we're going to. So I'm just going to carry on with this piece. If we go to the other side of this, this will be the front of it. And it's more, those sections are more obvious. This piece is also demonstrating a process of alchemy for me. So alchemy is the processing of the shit, the dark, the unconscious, the stuff I don't want to look at. And going through various processes, purifying, and it's all guided by consciousness and wanting to find the gold, which is consciousness, the meaning, and it's marked for me by the four colors. So we have the black, the shadow, we have the white, which is the purifying, and on the other side we have the red, which is the embodying, the enlivening, and all of these little pieces have been put together with gold safety pins. So the guiding principle, and gold for me is a symbol of consciousness and spirituality, spiritual principles. So the putting back together is guided by spiritual principles. So it's talking about developing an ethical, a moral compass within myself as well, which I determine. I see alchemy as the individuation process, and I need to find out and work out a morality for myself. It's no longer given to me by my community. This is what I would say is the post-metaphysical thing of I'm no longer in a community where the culture we got law, but a true ethical bearing is something that I've got to wrestle with and make of my own. So this is very much what this piece is about. But because these pieces have been put together quite loosely with it's quite a rigorous, deliberate process here, but it suggests that they could come undone. So nothing's really set. It's suggesting mobility as well. So by making this piece, I felt I was starting to make a map of this world, of my inner world, and then I proceeded to explore it. So it started off with a shelf piece, became the map. The map is also representative of, say, ideology, of ideas, of theory, and there's also, the conflict between theory and practice. And theory for me is something that only comes later. It's only after practice that theory arrives. And theory is also part of the meaning-making function. And for me, that happens later, because as I say, I don't know what I'm doing, and it's those ideas arrive later. So I took that map, and then I translated it into other material, which is this floor piece, and this one is called Coming Together. So is there anything you wanted to say about that one? Yes. So the papers also, it's all come from my recycle bin, and it includes everything from knitting patterns to bank statements to bits of Buddhist text, and we've also got,
and there was,
there's some very problematic stuff over here. I don't even know if I should show it.
On the other side I saw this.
Yes, so it's got friends in there, their child, so everything, how every single thing that comes through my life is material, because potential material for, or stuff that I've got to process, that I've got to integrate. It's like, what do you do with all this stuff? If I don't deal with it, the bigger unconscious, the landfill has to deal with it. So this really is me declaring I'm willing to take responsibility for my stuff.
Integrating as well as
Yes. Owning it, yeah.
But what struck me, what really I just think this is an incredible piece. It's absolutely incredible piece, and it just makes it's really helped me to understand. I mean, the synthesis in this piece of what you've shown before is phenomenal. But the one element, right? Pictures one element. What really struck me. I'm just going back to this side here. Traditionally, in Gnostic alchemy or in alchemy, they talk about the Negredo, the black, the Albedo, the white, the Citrinitas, which is the green, and then the Rubedo, the red. Citrinitas is the green or yellow, and then the Rubedo would be the final stage, the red. And I love what you've done with the colors, going from the black to the white to the red is the alignment, and then really the final color being the gold, which is kind of this idea of obviously this idea that alchemy is the transmutation of lead to gold. And what I love about it is the fact that gold is represented by these safety pins. And what immediately came up for me there was the notion that of the ultimate work, the final stage of the alchemical process, really being that which holds the disparate parts together.
Oh my God, really?
I thought it was very powerful. And it's in a sense, it's fragility as well. The fact that, as you said, it holds them together. That could easily come
spiral. I mean, it's just all there.
Could easily come apart.
Again. I mean, that's just, so for me, that's so resonant with the notion of myth.
Yes.
And of this world that you enter, which is really the container or the narrative, the meaning that holds the self together, that holds the whole image together, that holds the whole psyche together. And I think that's just phenomenal.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, I get all goosebumpy when I hear those kind of things. Because, for me, there's like this intelligence that's moving through the matter. And that's what, and I think that's what happens when we engage with the artist within it, and we all are artists inside. When we engage with that, then it's magic for me. This magic starts revealing itself.
And I like what you're saying about the intelligence in matter, because that was the basis of Gnosticism, is that the divine in matter, the divine is trapped in matter, and the alchemist, or the Gnostic practitioner, liberates the divine, which is exactly what you're talking about here. I think that particularly with our notion of it being recycled, not being seen to wasteful, but becoming an art installation, it really does feel like a liberation of the divine.
Yeah. Okay, so that one then got interpreted in a more three-dimensional way, with this work. So the actual material for this work is from another artwork. It was a wall piece, which was actually a whole lot of polystyrene. It was about a 4-meter wall piece, and it was quite thick. It's got a bit of depth to it. So I took the map from there, and then I translated all of those shapes into these shapes. And then what's significant about is where the map is upright, and this is something I learned from John, is like, that is very human. It's like humans are upright. What's significant about humans is that we're upright, and then from our earliest art, we would then put it onto the wall of the cave, But when we start working on the ground, we go back to an animal, more instinctual way of working. So we're looking, sorry? Black Pollock, exactly. So we're looking down. And for me, that also, what struck me about this piece is that there's something very playful about it. There's something very childlike about it. And I guess that's that part of ourselves when we are young and when we are children and on the all fours, when we haven't become upright. And we see the whole world perspective in another way. So for me, this piece is very much about being social, that in order to be fully whole, fully human, I have to be social. There's a sense of community. I need to embrace the child within, which I think the child for me is what steers the wonderment, the curiosity, the imagination. So even though that first piece was about growing up and maturing, I've still got to nurture the child within. And also, I was working primarily with two colors here. The one is green and the other is blue. So the land masses were the green sections, these square sections, and then the surrounds is the blue. And that's also started representing how the actual world, there's more water on the planet than there is continents. And the water or the oceans for me also represent the unconscious. How if the continents are those conscious parts of myself, how they are quite small in comparison to the bigger context, which is this huge unconscious, which I need to navigate, I need to integrate, I need to work with. I think I also want to add that this thing of integration and becoming whole is also stepping away or stepping beyond dualistic thinking, which is this or that, or right, wrong, or enemy, or tribe, or whatever, and moving into I need to include all, which is a far more difficult task. It's a far more difficult way to live life, but it makes a lot more sense, actually. And I also see that integral way of that integral consciousness as how we've got to proceed. I think that's our next evolutionary challenge. We're operating as a one world now, a global world. We don't have an us and them anymore. We are one family humanity. And that's very much what this piece is about, coming together. To get to this work, I had been working with pieces of tissue paper, which is this piece, but I'm going to go more into the detail of it. So the tissue paper had come from, it's the wrappings of toilet rolls, which took on a whole new light during COVID and lockdown. And originally what I had wanted to do was, so these were how I traced from there onto here, from those pieces over there. And originally what I thought of doing is placing those pieces that are on the shelf, I thought to place them on these maps. I saw these as maps. And I was going to frame each one individually. And I was going to then place those on that rack over there. So this rack would have had 22 individually framed maps, these pieces. But it became a very elaborate scheme which just didn't work. So I abandoned that idea, and this wall piece is what is the result of those individual maps. So pulling all those pieces together, there's 22 of them, and making one big piece. On this, it's just so beautiful on this floor how there's this beautiful reflection of that. And then during the installation, I kept out 3 of the pieces, that one, which are on the rack, just to give a visual tie-in of that process. What is significant about this work is that the paint on the tissue paper is on the other side. So what I'm suggesting here is that we're looking at the back of something, what's behind something. And what's behind this is, again, the spiral of life, this thread that's running through life, which I've now gone and stitched. So this whole spiral is stitched with thread. So I'm kind of mending this broken spiral, the spiral that got disrupted by all this cutting up. And stitching through paper can be quite hazardous. It wants to tear and it knots. So I've included all the knots, so that's all. It all gets put in. And then I've also placed these plaques of gold. It's a gold metal leaf, which are representing some kind of arcane ritual, spiritual ceremony, I guess. I'm wanting to refer to rituals, ceremonies, things which I need to have in place in order for this world to be.
When you say that, is gold the symbolic color there of the ritual and ceremony? Is that right?
Yes. For me, it's very much spiritual stuff. If I see gold, I always think of spiritual things. It just seems to be, there's something magical about it, otherworldly almost. And I have actually I did make small mandalas of the astrological glyphs, because the number 22 is actually referring to the 10 planets and 12 astrological signs, which corresponds with the 22 major arcana in the tarot. And what I've gone and done is made small mandalas with those individual glyphs, and I've placed them here. But they became too obvious, they became a bit garish, so I kind of painted over them so they become just traces. And in that sense, it was almost potentizing them. It's almost like making homeopathic frequencies of those things. So again, referring to or referencing rituals, in homeopathy, you've got to mix the stuff a lot, and so those kinds of processes, which are processes of meaning making, and returning. It's discipleship in some way of. Through discipline, returning to, say, a process of meditation daily, regardless of whether I like it or not, something grows. And that's what I understand ritual to be. So doing specific tasks with intent, with a specific intent, that's what grows. So this piece is referring to that. The title is The Map in the Terroir. So terroir is that term in winemaking, and it's all the various conditions that go into the winemaking. So it's the geography, the climate, the people, the culture, all of that, how that affects the taste of the wine. And my concern is that within myself, but also without, that if we don't take this on, the environment on, and really deal with it, we're only going to be left with a map. There will be no environment, there will be no terroir. It'll just be the archive of the map. Moving back to that rack, I also, just as another device to integrate it, So this rack, I really loved this as an object, and it came to represent, you can see in the background there's the very long landscape, which is also the horizon, and the horizon represents, it's part of the Western tradition, the Faustian tradition of having that horizon, that horizon that we're moving towards. It's the future which is pulling me towards it. I need that. I need to have that sense of vision in my life. Otherwise, I don't want to move. And then to balance that with the rack is the vertical. And the vertical is also something I need in my life. And the vertical speaks of hierarchy, which is very unfashionable. But I need hierarchical structures in my life, because without that I'm unable to evaluate. I need to place things higher than other things in order to create value. This is more important than that, and without that I'm unable to even navigate through or develop some kind of moral compass. So the rack is called Mai Ching, so it's a play on I Ching. So referring to the scrying that happens with art making, and also standing up for myself. And I learned recently from an endocrinologist that when we don't stand up for ourselves, when we don't present our truth or are truthful, our immune systems collapse. So it's for our own well-being that we are truthful and stand up for ourselves. It's really important. So I placed this sequence of colors. It's in some of the corners randomly, but it is moving from the bottom to the top to reinforce this sense of verticality. And they are going from black into blues, into yellows, into oranges, into reds, into black again. And that, for me, is a sequence and representing the colors of fire. So I'm wanting to bring in the element of fire. I mean, I've spoken of the earth, mentioned the sea, the water, and now fire comes in, which I then reinterpreted in another, and this is a very new technique for me with this landscape. Originally, it was the other way around, and was going to be a landscape of fire. And then once I had finished it, I realized, no, actually it's not. It's a landscape of space. It's a view into space. And this entire piece is thread, which is wrapping a piece of board. So I'm painting with thread, and it's very difficult to capture on the cell phone. But the colors are very intense, and this blue, indigo, black at the top really pulls one in. And then you've got the colors of fire at the bottom. And then there's just in the technique I'm using, which I will not reveal, you end up with this kind of absence or path in the center, which also kind of welcomes you into it. And so the title for this is Event Horizon, which is that edge of a black hole, that it's the point of no return. This also becomes a view of space. So something as another horizon, but perhaps also the view of the deepest unconscious, the deep black universe, the unknown. And there's something about space. When I contemplate that, when I meditate on that, I absolutely find my true proportion. That proportion. I'm right-sized. I start fitting my boots because it is just beyond the amount of space that there is. Space between planets, how fast everything's moving. I mean, from our perspective, it looks like nothing's moving, like these stars aren't moving, but they are going at ridiculous speeds. And that just, it's just, the mind boggles. So it kicks me out of this like over rational head cerebral thing and more just to the wonderment of being, of the universe, of being in a body. I did another, I would say, interpretation of that on the other wall, and that becomes the ocean. And the title of that is Ocean of Emptiness. So the process of emptying out, which I would say is also part of it's a paradoxical movement, that the process of individuation and say including everything is also feels like a process of emptying out, kind of using everything up. I suppose that's kind of like a nirvanic kind of thing. But there's also something about the ocean which also represents the unconscious for me, which also just makes my mind go still. It has the same effect as contemplating space. And then also just ecologically, the atrocity that we are committing with the ocean. How we rape the ocean and just dump things in the ocean. It says a lot of our cultures, how we don't recognize our unconscious, we just dump things there. Again, there's that path, there's this path that leads the viewer in there. Again, the whole thing's just done with thread, and these turquoises and reds. The next piece is this one over here. So 16 years ago, I found this object in the road. I was moving into an apartment, and I found this in the road, and it was a very potent image for me. And what it is, the world globe, which had been flattened. I mean, it had been ridden over by a car, I guess. And I mean, just as an object, I just found, okay, the art had already been made. It just had to be seen. And I kept it all this time, but I didn't want to interrupt it too much because it just is so potent, but I felt I did want to add to it. And yes, it could be gilding the lily, but the title is Global Acupuncture. So I've come in here and I've acupunctured this entire broken world with gold safety pins. So it's bringing in all those, all the metaphors and symbols of gold. I guess also like shamanic practice, the healing wounder and the wounding healer. But it's me trying to heal the world, trying to heal my world and the world. People have said to me it also looks like a flower and also a propeller, like it wants to move. So this piece up here is called End of Time, and it comprises, so I used to lecture, I was a lecturer in jewelry design. I lectured for a number of years, and then 2 years ago I was invited to take part in a conference. It was the first contemporary jewelry conference in South Africa. And so I decided I was going to do a performance for 2 days, and in those 2 days I threaded 6,000 safety pins onto a spool of what do you call it, tape. And it's actually like it's the tape that labels are made from for clothing. And I was looking at this idea of how jewelry traditionally, I was really looking at currency. I mean, built in here is time, because it takes time to do all this. But also this idea that with jewelry is a way of storing currency and also growing interest. So I could buy some gold and diamonds, and I can, have a piece of jewelry made, a pendant or something, and then years later it could be melted down and made into money again. But what I've become aware of recently is that we've got a new economy lurking, and it's called the attention economy, and how, like with this device that I'm now recording this all on, but all the social media stuff, how all these things are trying to grab my attention and direct it and steer it. And I don't know, I think it's a way of making money for them, but I just go on to look for a message, and 2 hours later I found that I've been down some rabbit hole. So I'm playing with this idea, is it possible, could it be possible that we now develop new kinds of devices where I could store attention? So I could then spend that attention at a later stage. And then what is this attention? You know, it's like this absurdist, fun-looking thing. And what is attention? What is intention? What's interest? What is being present? And how a lot of those ideas I've had to explore and examine just through meditation. So meditation's often, I've been meditating for a number of years. It's very much one of my major practices. But what is going on when we do meditate, etc., etc., etc. So I see this piece as opening up a lot of questions and ideas. Also, somebody recently suggested that it looked like an hourglass, like the sands of an hourglass that are falling out, and they suggested that the title be Running Out of Time, which I love. So it's been end of time up until 2 days ago. Now it's becoming running out of time, which is also what happens when I'm on social media. It's like suddenly I have no more time left, I've spent it all.
But going back to your original title of End of Time, can you contextualize that somehow?
Yes, now I've got to kind of backtrack a bit. So right from the beginning, those 22 pieces, which refers to Saturn, which is the father of time. So time is something that features a lot is in the work. Also, a lot of my making takes a lot of time. It's very meditative, very labor-intensive. And there was something that happened when I turned 50. I felt like I crossed a line where there was no more time. Like I simply had to get on with things. I couldn't put anything off anymore. I just had to get on with it. And so to answer the question, I'm not exactly clear why it was the end of time, why that became the title.
But just picking up what you're saying now, so it's almost like, just pick up with that final idea, it's almost a bit like end of a Valentine, like end of time. There's no more time to do anything other than what is absolutely essential.
Yes, the work has to be done. And I see very much that's what art is about. As a metaphor, but also how I conduct myself as a human being. There's no more practice. It's just get on with the job. You know, somebody said, I love this, suit up and show up. It's that. Be a responsible human contributing to the rest of humanity. It's something like that. What I also find interesting about time is that it's so democratic. Every single one of us has 24 hours a day. Nobody's got any more or less. So I get really upset if somebody wastes my time. If I've made a meeting and they don't show up on time. It's also an indicator of whether somebody's matured or not, or taking life seriously. If people resist being on time, in my opinion, they're not even beginning to grow up. It's the first indicator of I'm willing to play, I'm willing to be grown up, I'm willing to mature.
Arrive on time.
Arrive on time. It's one of the biggest things I had with my students. If students didn't arrive at a lecture, and then I would have a big fuss, but I would just lock the door. It's like, sorry, you're going to learn this. You're disrespecting me, you're wasting my time and other people's time. And like, that is highly disrespectful. You can do whatever you like with your 24 hours, but don't fuck with mine or somebody else's. It's a sign of respect. And it's a very immediate way of developing maturity and developing respect. And integrity, it's all those principles. So then we're going to move on to this one, which this one happened over a number of years and got completed in the very first month of lockdown. So the bottom section, I think I had already finished about 7 years ago. and then the top section about 3 years ago, and then it came together in 2020. So in March 2020. This one's called Purple Rain. Often my titles go back to song titles, because music has played a very important role in my life. And so the bottom of this piece is it's old ground sheets that are used during painting. So it's got a lot of energy from my painting years in it, and when I made paintings. And then the top section, those square sections, are made from CD boxes. And now this is something that fascinates me, that us as humans, we and this is what happened in my life, that in the mid-80s, I worked in a record shop, and it was when CDs were just coming in. And it was like, oh my God, this is so exciting. And within 25 years, CDs have now become obsolete. We don't even use them. And I didn't even have a player to play CDs on. And yet there was something that was so precious, and they had all this, it was all this music and all this collection. And now it is a material, it's reduced to a material that can't even be recycled. The plastic can't be recycled. So it's something, I'm speaking about all the stuff that we have, this obsession with quantity, and then not even considering what's going to happen to the actual things that we are producing. And I see this as a landscape, and it's a landscape that can function in two ways. It could be a vertical, where there's sky and earth, or it could be an aerial, where there's water, almost like a big tsunami coming to the earth. And people have said they've found the top quite heavy, so it's something weighing on the earth, or it's something that's about to engulf the earth. And then what I've done is, so there's a lot of detail at the bottom. I've pinned it, so again it's like referring to a kind of acupuncturing again, healing the earth. And then I've bound this whole thing with gold thread, which you don't quite see face on, and that's also quite a significant thing in a Jungian way. But you do see it when you look at it from the side. So that is something I learned, I think it's from the myth of Cupid and Psyche, where Psyche is given all these hectic tasks by Venus. And one of them is to collect bits of the gold from the golden fleece, from I think it's the rams, but they're really aggressive. And the only way she could do it was she couldn't approach the rams head on, because they would have probably killed her. She had to go and pick the bits of golden fleece that were on the bushes that they had walked past. And what it speaks of is, so Psyche is the vision of the soul. It's the approach of the soul, which has to be subtle. It has to be from the side. It has to be peripheral. Whereas the ram is head-on, it headbutts. And it's the difference astrologically between the ram, which is Aries, full frontal head-on, and Cancer, which the crab walks sideways. So if you approach this head-on, you don't see the gold. But if you come in from the side, you will see the gold becomes visible. It's just, we've got a lighting issue here. You'll see how thick the gold gets. And it's something I've noticed in my work. If you approach it head-on, often you miss it. But if you look at it from the side, it requires a more subtle, soul-type vision in order to see it. And that again refers back to like masculine and feminine principles, how the masculine will be head-on, straightforward, and the feminine is from the side, subtle. I find those things fascinating, and how it actually works out. I made it work 10 years ago where it had all these fine threads. You did not see a single thread, only from the side could you see the threads. This one over here, this piece is called Black Moon Lilith. And Black Moon Lilith is a point in an astrology or an astrological chart, which I'm describing as the doorway for people to access their shadow.
Say the name.
Black Moon Lilith. It's not I think it's a hypothetical point. It's something where things cross. It's not actually a body. So there's a whole mythology around Lilith as the early feminine that was kicked out of Adam had a whole thing with her. She wasn't going to be subservient, etc. So he then wanted Eve, or wanted a different woman.
One that knew her place.
Huh?
One that knew her place.
Yes, with the rib, yes. And she's going to be subservient. So this one now, the last one had the CD boxes. Now these are the CDs which I've covered. This is an ongoing series called Cover Versions. And here I've covered the CDs with threads. But what I've wanted to create in this one is a black rainbow. So it's like the rainbow that you get on oil, and a lot of plastics come from oil. So this is the oil that we gouge out or siphon off from the deep inside the earth and make these things that will no longer melt back into the earth. And that for me is relating, and it speaks a lot about our relationship, or my relationship with the shadow. So I think I can put things back in the earth that will mysteriously disappear, and they don't, because if I push something down, it's going to come back harder. It's like a bubble. If you push a bubble down, it just wants to come up more. And the shadow for me are all those bits, those things that are taboo. They could be tabooed by my culture. There could be things that I don't like about myself. It speaks back to those early things that I call character defects, things that I've got to work on, things that I've got to grow, things I've got to mature, things that I've got to develop. I don't go along with this thing, oh, we're born perfect. No, we're not. If we're born perfect, then there's nothing to do. We're born broken, and we've got to work on ourselves. That's the work, it's the alchemical work, it's the work that we've got to do. But what I find interesting with the whole thing with the shadow is that it's also the place where treasures lie. So here we've got some gold bits, we've got some gorgeous magenta gold metallic bits. So when I dig in there, it's who knows what it is. It also speaks of how we trawl the sea, with these big nets, looking for diamonds and things.
And also sort of salvage operations like treasure hunting in the sea that takes place.
Yeah, lost treasure. Yes, exactly.
Tremendous romance around that idea.
There is, yes. I mean, just as you said that, I can just see those galleons, and the mermaids, and
it's a spectacular piece.
Yeah, thank you. Also new, quite a new way of working for me. So then there's one last piece just around the corner, and that's on the title wall. And this one is, I think this is nearly 3 years old. And this one I put on the title wall because for me, this is who and what the whole show is dedicated to. And this one is called Foamborne, which is what Aphrodite means in Greek, which is the original name for Venus. And Venus rules beauty and art and aesthetics, and how beauty and aesthetics that's a guiding principle for me. It's a way I navigate life as an artist and also just as a human. If things aesthetically work for me, it's generally a good path to follow. It's almost like a guide, a kind of synchronistic guide in some way. And
there are principles that you navigate your life by.
Aesthetics, yeah. It's like this placing is wrong, and it's something I can trust. It's almost like I taste my way through it, which is interesting because Venus astrologically rules two signs, Taurus and Libra. And Taurus is the bull. It's all about taste. And if something tastes wrong, it's wrong, And then with Libra, it's all about balance, having this sense of balance. So this is loosely based on Botticelli's Birth of Venus, and the myth is the sky god Uranus. He was castrated by his son Kronos, Saturn, time. His testicles fell into the ocean, and from that union Venus was born. So it's a combination, or the coming together of sky and water, also the unconscious, that this principle of aesthetics of beauty comes as a goddess. So there's a lot of detail here with pinning things down, but there's a looseness in pinning, something like atomistic about it. Again, the gold, and then I've used the hexagon because 6 is, in some traditions, is seen as the number for Venus. It's something very satisfying about the hexagon. And 6 can be divided by 2 and 3. And I think that's it.